you embroider?
I have minutes to.
What the hell are you doing?
Somebody has to save our kids.
Thank God we're hot chicks with superpowers.
Good afternoon, Feminerds. Welcome to our third episode roundtable on the movie Disobedience. I'm Leigh. I saw the movie twice, and I'm a queer woman who is not Jewish, but so I grew up in a strong Christian community and with the church, so I can definitely empathize with what the characters were going through.
My name's Elizabeth. I did grow up in kind of a weird religious situation and background. So I grew up half Jewish and going to Hebrew school during the week and then Sunday school on the weekend. I've seen this community from both sides. So it's been kind of an interesting life growing up. That's my aspect on it. And I've seen the movie and enjoyed it.
Hi, everyone. My name is Carla Vikingstad. I'm calling in from Seattle, and I am queer, POC, not Jewish, but I was raised in a strict religious community and had some very interesting multi-religious background as a child. So I'm coming into this film as a scholar of film and someone who really appreciates film and has a pretty good context for queer film and what's out there. And I'm really excited to be here with all of you to talk about this movie.
So Disobedience, this is a film that was originally a book. It was fiction, and the author is Naomi Alderman. She touched upon her experience growing up in an Orthodox Jewish community in England. She is not queer, but she had a lot of LGBTA friends in the Orthodox Jewish community, and so this is kind of based off of their accounts. The movie itself was directed by a man, Sebastian Lelio. He's also not queer, but he directed A Fantastic Woman, which is a trans queer foreign film, and it's won a lot of awards, and so is he.
Okay, so this movie, one of the things that really fascinated me about this is it has so many different themes. This is a movie about love, loss, freedom, repression, so many different themes in here, sort of interwoven and inside out and upside down, real contradictions as well. What theme or themes in this film personally resonated the most for you?
There were so many things, and I think that's why I had to see it twice. The first time, I just kind of let it go over me, and I cried through the whole thing. And the second time, I was kind of able to pick apart different things. For me personally, I think the religious part was probably the strongest theme for me that hit home. And then the love story, unable to be with the person that you want to be with, unable to be the person that you are due to the community and the expectations of where you live.
I don't know. It's hard for me. I think one of the things that resonated most with me was the loss of a parent when she's going through that and like having a very big disconnect from that. And so it's very like her experience of kind of wanting to feel that love that she had when she was a child and then standing there and being like, oh, I can't even have a hug.
I think for me, when I think about this movie, I think about staying versus leaving. I think in this movie you have this interesting situation where you have a character who has chosen to stay and build a life of conformity and trying to get through, and you have a character that has run away and said, no, this is not who I am, this is not what I can stay in, and it made me really reflect on my own choices and, whether or not you stay or run from a situation. I think all of us can relate to situations where we face something or skirted around something, and then there's this opportunity and you have this opportunity to finally have something. And do you make that leap and that change, or do you decide not to and let the opportunity pass you by? I think those are very universal themes that I could really relate to, that felt very truthful to me.
That's so interesting how we all picked something different. Yeah. That's cool. That's what I love about film.
One of the things that I kind of did not like about this movie the most was that they show the Orthodox community as being, it is definitely a closed off community. It is a community that lives inside of itself. They take care of their own. But it shows it as kind of like a dark place. And for these characters through their eyes, it's definitely something that can be seen as dark or a trap or something they can't get out of. But the community in itself is completely different from that if you are a part of it and don't have that feeling of being trapped. I have been to several Orthodox communities, and I am not full-blown Jewish. I am not Orthodox. I am no longer practicing. But even when I go into those communities, they're very welcoming. They're very open to teaching and explaining and showing, and very much more for men. I can sit down and have a conversation with a rabbi, and it's not this weird thing. And so in the movie, I feel like they show it as being too closed off. They do marry inside of the community. Kids go to certain schools, but it's not a dark place. A lot of people are very happy where they're at there. They take care of each other. Nobody is going to go hungry. Nobody's going to go homeless. Nobody is going to go without being able to get a good job or things like that. So they're really about taking care of each other. And I didn't quite like how dark and how they perceive that community in this movie. It's one of the things that I wasn't really a fan of.
So a friend of mine had posted an article that was written by an Orthodox Jewish woman who saw the movie, and she also didn't care for it for that very reason. She didn't feel that it was an accurate portrayal of the way her life is in an Orthodox Jewish community. She also really didn't like the trope of over-sexualizing Orthodox women who feel trapped or restrained. However, at the same time, she understood that it's an important voice for the queer women who do feel this way in the Orthodox community.
Yeah.
So the theme of this movie that I really think is very powerful and very cool, the tagline of this film was "Love is an act of defiance." And I'm wondering how defiant you think this movie was. Was this a unique film when you think of the canon of lesbian films out there? Was there anything about this movie that struck you as unique or different or something that you haven't seen before? Or did you feel this was a run-of-the-mill queer love story?
I haven't seen too many films that took place in the Jewish Orthodox communities that were queer films, so that I thought was unique for me to see.
There's none. Yeah, I mean, that's definitely a unique aspect, but at the same time, I feel like a lot of the tropes of the queer community films, especially when dealing with lesbian films, are the middle-aged housewife who finds a friend or somebody comes back from their childhood, and then they follow down the path that they went down before. The only thing that takes it out of that trope is that at the end, Esty decides that she's not going to jump straight into another relationship. So that's the only thing that I really feel like takes it out of the traditional trope of a lesbian film. Like, I don't know how many I've seen that all follow that, this was something I did before when I was a child, and then I don't do that anymore, and then kind of fall straight back into doing it.
I think that these characters are very unique. One thing I really loved about the movie was I'm an actor myself, at least I was when I was younger. And so this script for me was like an actor's paradise. I mean, I can see why these actors really hungered for these roles and like threw 150% of themselves in there. You don't get roles like that very often. Each character is really complex, really multifaceted, just sort of endlessly fascinating to me. I felt like these were characters that you could have an opinion about in the beginning and be completely surprised by where they went in the end. I haven't seen characters I thought were that fleshed out, multidimensional and interesting in a long, long time. And this is a queer love story, and I'm so fascinated by these characters, these female characters. I have to say the male character was a real surprise for me, and he felt very different from any that I can think in memory. So I really felt that in terms of what was different, I can see where you're coming from in terms of several tropes that felt familiar, and yet this movie had a rich inner life that felt unique to me. And really, I just loved the uniqueness and the depth and the complexity of the characters. That's that kind of meat is a storytelling dream, lots of epic cinematic elements there.
Yeah, and definitely some amazing acting talent that went at it as well.
Yeah, Totally.
That's something that I thought about. Was this is a movie that unfortunately flew under the radar quite a bit. It was picked up by Bleecker Street, which is a distributor who I think did a really bad job understanding what they had on their hands and really marketing this and packaging it and getting it out into enough theaters in a way that made sense. And I've thought about award season. I feel like this is the kind of movie and these are the kind of performances that are ripe for that. This is a movie that in a different world could have picked up Best Actress, Best Supporting Actress, Best Supporting Actor nominations, possibly even Best Director nomination, if it had enough backers and enough people. Because the Oscars and awards like that are so political. Even when you have an indie that, like Moonlight, that'll jump in, there's usually people that are really championing behind the scenes and really pushing for that. And I'm not sure that this is the kind of film that's going to get that, but just such remarkable performances. I feel all these actors could be nominated, and Rachel McAdams was the real surprise for me. I think this is career best for Rachel Weisz and Rachel McAdams.
Yeah.
I agree with the poor marketing. Actually, it was marketed as a lesbian movie right from the start. But when you watch the movie, the lesbian storyline was set up to be more of a surprise or a plot twist. And I almost wish I didn't know about it beforehand because I think it would have made the experience different. And I saw the preview for the first time at Klexicon, but if I didn't go to Klexicon, it wasn't on TV or anything like that. When it finally was released, there was only one theater in Denver that was playing it. And so I just don't think that it was as successful as it could have been.
Yeah. I saw quite a bit of marketing coming up for it, but the reason for that is because I delve a lot into YouTube and blogs and stuff for queer based web series, cinema, things like that. So I read a couple articles about it, and I had seen a couple of kind of previews as it came out. But only because of that. If it was just like on mainstream stuff, I wouldn't have seen anything for it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think something that when I think about how I first heard about this film, it was actually from reviews coming out of TIFF, the Toronto International Film Festival. There were critics that had seen this, and if you look at the critical ratings, I mean, it's considered a very good film. I think it's one of the best films I've seen this year, and I'm just sad that more people haven't watched it. When I think about the queer community in general, it's tough, it's hard to get films out there. And when there are queer films, I feel like there's a lot of folks that don't show up, partly because they don't know about it and it's not marketed as well. And that also just, if a movie doesn't make box office bucks, then it's going to have a harder time. That door isn't going to be open as much for more queer films, unless really great queer films. So it's sad to see this one fly under the radar in that way. And that's how I found out about it early on, was really just reading reviews. I think it's so important for queer people to support queer cinema in the theater and really get that money going so more films can be made.
Absolutely.
I'm 100% with that. I'm always happy to go and see these movies, and I'm sad when other people don't.
So really just thinking about Rachel Weisz was the producer of this film, and she very specifically wanted to make a queer love story. She talked about how she played just about every other type of character in her career. She had been in movies with tons of men, and she really was looking to produce something that had to do with women, different roles where she could interact with different women. And she thought, what about, queer love story? And so she started researching, and she was apparently reading lesbian fiction and trying to find a story that would really resonate, which was really impressive to me. And she found this book and really fell in love with it and said, this is specifically the one I want to make. So it was a very intentional passion project for her. She wanted to make this film. She wanted to represent a queer love story on screen, and I think it's wonderful when women take the initiative and they want to get stories made about women. And I feel it's so hard to find females. I'm not sure what the statistic currently is, but I remember it used to be that only 4% of directors were women. So a very small number. So when you actually do have somebody like a Rachel Weisz or Rachel McAdams, somebody who is in that sort of, I don't know if you consider A-list bracket, but pretty much. I mean, they're pretty big stars. They have some clout. They have some ability to get something made and get it out there. And I'm really very pleased that Rachel Weisz decided to go in that direction. I think that's wonderful that women are empowering themselves and that the people who are in those power positions say, hey, this is important. Let's tell more stories about this. I have a funny theory about how Rachel McAdams got into this, and I'm not here to spread rumor or anything, but I've watched quite a few interviews with the Rachels, and I think there's just a lot of admiration that these two had for each other. They worked on a film prior only for a day, and apparently they work in a similar way. So I think that was probably the catalyst. But I kind of would like to think that Rachel Weisz was really thinking this over, because Rachel McAdams is sort of the last person I would have thought would have ended up in this movie. She's really an uncanny casting choice when you think about it. I mean, this is a woman who is in the most heterosexual movie of all time, The Notebook. You have her in you have her in Mean Girls, where she's playing that very sort of snarky character. And I've always just associated her as so quintessentially straight. And so it was such a wonderful subversion to see her in this just flat out queer character, who has so much inside of her, like bursting to get out. So that was really exciting. But if I was Rachel Weisz and I had the choice and I could just pick anyone I wanted for this movie, based on what I've seen on interviews, she seems to have a little girl crush on Rachel McAdams. So I think she figured, if I'm going to do it with anybody, it's going to be Rachel McAdams. And fortunately, she was on board. Oh, I'm Team Esty all the way, but I have to say, the more I watch this film, the more Ronita's really just such a fascinating character. I think both of these characters are interesting, complex women. I think this is a movie that so easily could have been written off as just like the sex scene, and we made this whole movie just for that. But I think the reality is that it was so refreshing to see that this was a movie that was about so much more than that, and so layered and deep, and was great that you had this rich story around that, and it wasn't just the obvious go-to, but this is a story that was very meaningful and meant quite a lot.
I feel like this needs to be addressed, so let's talk about the sex scene. I felt really weird about this sex scene. It was something that was leading up in the movie. I'm like, woo, this is it. This is happening. It's the time. And that was weird. When we were at Klexicon, we saw a panel about lesbian sex scenes, and you can tell when they are directed by women or directed by lesbians and when they're obviously not. And this one was obviously not. She said at the panel, one of the biggest pet peeves that she has is that when clothing is still left on, or if they wake up the next morning and they're still wearing their bras and things like that, because just nobody does that. So in this movie, during the sex scene, they left their shirts on, which was interesting. I mean, one of them was wearing like a full-on sweater, and it just seemed kind of odd to me that they were having this extremely intimate moment, and we're still like pretty much fully clothed in some ways. So I don't know, that felt weird to me. And then the spitting thing, I just... Like, you could audibly hear in the audience everybody going, oh. It was one of those, like, whether it was gay or straight, it doesn't matter. Like, it just was gross. So, like, weird and gross, and, like, who the fuck does that? So, sorry. Yeah.
I think I sat there when I was watching it, and we were sitting there together, and I was like,
yeah, like, putting the popcorn down. I'm not hungry anymore. Yeah. So anyway, but I did think that the removing of Esty's wig was probably the most intimate part of that. So,
it's interesting. I want to speak to some of these points and do so respectfully, because I think we all have totally different opinions. We all come from totally different places, and that's what's so fascinating about having panelists who were all saying such different things and were coming from such different perspectives. Sex scenes in movies are a really interesting topic. I tend to think that I cringe a little bit if I'm honest, when people critique the sex scenes in a movie from the perspective of people not really having sex like that, only because I think sexuality is probably the most diverse human behavior that there is, and I think that everybody has a different approach to that, or a different way that they exist to that. So on my wall, I have a movie room here, and I have all these different movie posters all over. And the one that's in the background is actually Blue is the Warmest Color, which was probably one of the most controversial lesbian films ever made. Mm-hmm. And that was something that constantly came up was, lesbians don't really have sex like that. And I even heard straight women who would have conversations around that. And I thought it was so funny, But I felt like I don't think there's a right or wrong way to have sex. So I think I just take a more sex positive approach on that. And I think I just try to let people do their thing. And maybe I felt like there were a lot of mysteries in this movie, a lot of things that weren't explained, which I love. I love when a movie's allowed to have a secret. And I wasn't really sure what this scene was about. the spitting scene, of course, I refer to, which made its way into a lot of reviews. And I remember something that I had read where somebody felt it was kind of ritualistic, like maybe this had something to do with something they did as young people, like, kids sometimes will spit on their hand and shake it or something like that, maybe this was tied into the history of these characters somehow. But I think the way it was meant was more metaphoric here. Obviously, it's, SD, I don't want to, spoiler alert, see, I can't go there, but there's a revelation later in the film that SD finds something out after this scene has taken place. And so I think there's a sort of a metaphor there about essentially, I can't really go into it without giving something away, but essentially this idea of sort of rebirth, new life, etc. I think it's sort of metaphoric of that. But I think it's interesting, that moment. I hear that a lot. I think about Blue is the Warmest Color, for example. Very controversial movie, but a movie that I love because I feel like it depicts the emotional experience of love and adolescence in a way that feels more authentic than any film I can think of. And so there was a lot of emphasis on the sex scene of this film, which was like less than 10 minutes of a 3-hour film, whereas I felt the 2 hours and 50 minutes did focus on emotional content and relationship, and that was totally steamrolled by people just, sort of trying to minimize this movie by critiquing that sex scene so much, when I thought, what really made that movie beautiful was something totally different. And so I think with these movies, I found that certainly in reviews, I read a lot about the sex scene and the spitting scene. And I have to admit, it was a curiosity for me. I was like, wow, how are they going to work that into the scene? And is this how do you get that into a romantic scene? How are they going to do this? So I was totally intrigued when I read that there was going to be some kind of spitting moment. I was like, oh my God, what's going to happen? Tune in to find out, So I thought that was, that was kind of a surprising moment. But I felt like there was just something about the history. These actors had to work really hard to just craft history and come up with something. And maybe there was something in their past that had something to do with that moment too. I don't know. But in terms of the clothing, I think from what I've read that was partially in response to Blue is the Warmest Color in a way, because that movie was problematic and there was a lot behind the scenes with that movie that was problematic. And so my understanding is that Sebastian Lelio wanted the actors to feel safe, and he really wanted to focus on their emotional experience. So he focused on their eyes and their mouths instead of breasts and skin. And so he was trying to showcase an emotional experience. And so it makes me wonder if there is a male director, if he's sort of damned either way. If he shows skin, then he's a pervert. If he shows clothes in a sex scene with clothes, then he's not really being authentic. And so I applaud him for, being conscious of that, if that's where that was coming from. I did think it was interesting to see some clothes, especially because the clothing was so ritualistic too. And I think the removing of the wig was just such a beautiful, powerful moment. And I think the removing of this sort of clothes would have been very symbolic too. But I think that the choice was made to not depict that, just to let the actors feel more free and let them really focus on the emotional intensity. Because I think that's what these roles and this sort of story, that was the story he wanted to tell, I think. And apparently there was more to the sex scenes too, and it was edited to just focus more on Este's experience and her orgasm being a symbolism of freedom that she finally has in this sort of powerful moment, instead of making it about both of them and both of their pleasures necessarily. So I think that they all took a lot of care. It was a very storyboarded scene, unlike Blue is the Warmest Color, where the actors had to improv, etc. It must have been a lot more scary to work in that way than to have the safety of these scenes and these shots are very intentional, and this is what we're going to do and why. So I think it was a sensitive, emotional portrayal. I think you don't see that in sex scenes very often. Desert Hearts is my favorite love scene ever. Monica knows this. And part of the reason why is it's just such a emotional experience. And so I felt like that came through in this film because you were focused more on eyes and breathiness and mouths, and it was more about the connection these two people have and what it means for them to have this moment. So in that sense, I was okay with the clothes on, though for personal frivolous reasons, would have been nice if it wasn't there. But I can appreciate the thought behind the way it was filmed as well.
I also wondered afterwards, when I saw it the second time, if maybe they had purposely left the clothes on as well, because anytime Esty is sleeping with David, it was very much a ritualistic of, we're taking our clothes off now, we're getting into bed, it's time to have sex, this is what we do. And she was fully naked for that, and we saw, nudity with that, and it just didn't seem intimate in any way. It just seemed like something that had to happen in their marriage type thing. And so I wondered if maybe the leaving of clothes was in some way a defiance of that in the female sex scene.
Yeah, I think Ronit was making love to her mind.
I agree. It was very much an emotional scene.
It's funny you say that, because there's a lot of movies that in the queer community that were almost entirely advertised based on the sex scene or the makeout scene. Like Elena Undone was the 12-minute long makeout scene, and it was advertised for that, or Below Her Mouth was all about the sex scenes and all that stuff. I was like, this one you didn't think of that. The sex scene was not what brought anybody to this. It was more about the characters. For me, the acting. I don't know if I really want. I don't know if for me, a lot of the queer movies I'm going to see, I'm not going to see them anymore for the sex scene. I just want to see characters that resonate to me in TV, in movie, in cinema, on web series. And we're seeing more and more and more, right? We're seeing more TV shows, sometimes being used more to bring their ratings back, but we're seeing more and more TV shows that are producing with female queer characters. More and more movies every year. Before it was maybe 3 or 4 a year. Now we're up to almost 10 a year. And there may be varying budgets, but there's more and more being released. So I don't know if I necessarily go to see movies now for there's going to be a great sex scene. I just want to see a good love story, and both of these women definitely have the acting skill and the talent to create a good love story. The moments, those little moments where they're looking at each other or when they're touching each other, are more romantic to me than anything else.
Oh, I totally agree. I think it was marketed, though, the preview that we saw, it was very heavily on the sex scene part. So I think that was, because I remember at Klexicon, everybody was like, woo! And so, but like I said, that's just the way that these things are sometimes marketed. But no, definitely this is way more than just a sex scene movie.
Yeah.
That wasn't even my favorite part.
Yeah, it's funny. I have a friend this week who was talking about, he was sort of joking about sort of queer representation in film, and we got into a talk about different actors that were realistically portraying chemistry with same sex. And I was thinking about this movie and something that there's this thing that happens sometimes when straight actors play a gay character where it's almost like they're winking to the audience, I'm not really gay, Right. And how that's done is really just not submitting and giving into the situation and committing to the level that you would expect for them. So, for example, I think of Julianne Moore, kind of a random example. Great actress. She's been in maybe 5 or 6 movies where she played queer. So she's obviously an ally, has a lot of queer friends, probably, really trying to support the community. But, anytime she's kissing a woman, I just never buy it. She just feels like a straight woman kissing a woman. And I think I don't feel that heat. I don't feel that hunger. That is absolutely not the case with this movie. And I think part of that is you have actors here. You have people who are the real deal. These folks are amazing actors. They're thinking actors. They're thinking about, oh my gosh, these two people haven't seen each other in 10, 15 years. And there's just all this repression and all these feelings. And what would it really be like if you just turned off a part of yourself for that long and you have this one moment to really let it all out? So it's almost like a pressure cooker when it happens. There's just so much desire and hunger and passion in this film. And that is just so believable to me. And I just have to give props to the Rachels. They really, they were really, that commitment level was 150%, and they really understood these characters and the situation they were in, and they really were just so free in those moments and those scenes, and it was a really refreshing thing to see. so a character that I thought was really fascinating in this movie that I didn't expect to was the male character. And when I saw this film, I have to admit my attention was fully on the Rachels. Like, I really didn't want to think about anything else, you know. And I certainly did not want to be talking about this guy. And when I saw the trailer, I was like, oh, I know exactly who this guy is, you know. And I was like, this is the character who's going to come in and not let these two people to be together, and he's going to block everything. And I just felt like he was the real twist for me, honestly, when I think about this, was that character and how shocking he was. Such a refreshing character. There's this beautiful moment, and I don't want to give too much away as we're talking about this film, because I really want people to watch it, and I want them to get that element of surprise there. But this was a character that also changes rather dramatically. I mean, all these three parts have a real arc to them, and I've never seen a portrayal like this before. I'd love to keep talking about it. There's so much I could say about him, but I just don't want to ruin it for someone else. But I thought he was incredibly special for a number of reasons. I really felt like I was seeing something truly rare on the screen in that character. I think as much as we can talk about the Rachels, the actor in this film, his name was Alessandro Nivola. He's done a lot of independent films. He usually plays British characters, interestingly enough. He might be like one of the only Americans I can think of that's consistently playing a British character. Usually it's the other way around. You have a lot of British actors that pretend to be American. So he's interesting. He finds his way into all kinds of British movies for some reason. But he really put on a career best as well. He was, interestingly enough, doing a lesbian tie-in. He was in Laurel Canyon. I don't know if anyone remembers that movie with Kate Beckinsale was in that, and Frances McDormand. They all have a scene together, a couple. But yeah, so it was interesting to see him on the screen again. But what a multi-dimensional, layered performance and character that was. And to me, that character spoke to, I think, sort of the true ideals of religion. You know, I think this movie is about, you know, when we're talking about community and restrictions in community, there are these rules and there are restrictions that our communities impose on us for a number of different reasons. And I think when you think about the basic tenets of religion and what you want to believe the ultimate goals of religion are, I think things can get a little muddier. Everybody has different interpretations. But I think when you think about compassion and acceptance and all those sort of deeper things that religion is really supposed to move towards, or that people really want to get out of it, I think this is in a way the most like spiritually evolved character. You know, I feel like he really exemplifies like the greatest facets of what religion could or should potentially be for people. He's an enlightened character. You know, he gets to a place of acceptance that is really just beautiful, and I was completely struck by that character.
I totally agree, and actually, of all the characters, he was the one I connected with the most. His transformation was just beautiful.
I can agree with that. I mean, and definitely with the religious aspect, but also with the fact that, like, he did love both of these women. And even though everything that's going on, he still can remember that he loves them and he wants them to be happy, and he won't stop loving them. And so he does make that growth in his life to figure out how to handle the situation.
He does, and it's an act of defiance for him too, by doing that, and even
Accepting
very beautiful moment that I won't reveal that happens there when we see him for one of the last times. That was just shocking to me, that moment. Is really, again, that acceptance. He's breaking his own rules. You know, this is somebody whose life will be forever altered by this experience too. I mean, he's losing a lot, but he's gaining a lot in a different sense. And this is someone that will have backlash. He'll probably have his own repercussions in the community and maybe have totally different choices, but I think that's going to be okay with him because he's on a different plane at that point. So it's really remarkable.
I completely agree with that.
Yeah.
His transformation is his realization and his story arc is definitely one of the best in this movie.
Yes.
And his fruition and what he realizes at the end and those last moments is kind of something that I think everyone wishes they could, that reaction they could have if something like that happened.
Yeah, that's
don't want
how
to really show anything or give anything away, but yeah, they kind of like I wish I was enlightened or at that point in my life where I could make that decision and have that reaction if something like that happened in my life. And then I sit there and I'm like, no, that's not how I'd react. That's not.
Well, this has been an amazing conversation, and I'm really glad that we all were able to get together to discuss this. Does anybody have any final thoughts?
Yeah, this is a beautiful, beautiful movie. I highly recommend it. I think it's an excellent film. Again, one of the best films I've seen this year. I think it's a real underrated gem that's kind of flying under the radar. These are performances you have to see. This is the reason I go to the movies, just to see performances like this, to feel so many different textures and layers and emotion. I think this movie has so much to say, and I think it's very interpretive. I think everyone who sees it is going to have a different experience. I think if they see it again, and this is definitely the kind of film I recommend you see again, you're going to have a different experience, and you could probably keep watching it and having a different experience. I've seen it a couple times, and each time my views on it have really evolved. So I'm just really hoping that people go to the theaters, if it's still there, and shell out for it, and certainly get the DVD so that that money can support filmmaking and really get put into the pockets of making more films like this. We really need representation and visibility, and I'm grateful for this movie for its representation of queer love, as well as even a community that I don't see very often depicted in film. It's just great to see a different story come onto the screen than what I'm typically used to, and I think this film has a lot to offer everybody.
Yeah, I can definitely agree. Like, it was for somebody who is constantly craving new media, whether it being, like I said, like digital, web, cinematography, cinema, as well as books and comic books that deal and depict the queer community. It is definitely one that I was happy to see, one that I was happy all around with. There are things that I didn't like about it. There are things I think that almost anybody can say that they don't like about certain movies, right? We can sit down and pick apart any movie, and there'll be issues that one person will love and one person will hate. So there are definitely things that I didn't like about it, but as a whole, I'm really pleased with the movie, and I'm really happy to see more and more depiction of this community, whether it just be queer or the Orthodox community, and in this time. Yeah.
Well, I just want to take a moment to thank everybody who is listening to our podcast, and to thank everybody who has participated in this roundtable today. So thank you. I'm Leigh.
Elizabeth.
Carla.
So thank you for listening, and please like us on Facebook or follow us on Instagram and Twitter. You can tune in to all of our podcasts on iTunes, Podbean, YouTube, or at thefeminerdfiles.net.